Hello, my name is Caben Chomber, and today I'll be presenting my research project for Kines 314, and this is on the effects of static versus dynamic stretching on sprint performance. I found this topic interesting because I'm an ex-college athlete and a current high school soccer coach, so this is especially important for warm-up routines, and I just enjoy learning about the science behind it. So the research question specifically I'll be looking at is what is the effect of static versus dynamic stretching on sprint performance? This question matters because sprinting is a foundational movement in many sports, and the way an athlete prepares before sprinting can either enhance or limit their performance. There are long standing debates in athletic training about whether static stretching is helpful or harmful before high speed activities. Some people still swear by static stretching before, while others have completely moved on to dynamic methods. My goal was to use current research and kind of explore my own data to better understand what works best. So, a little background and some definitions. Before we get into the research, it's helpful to just define a few key terms. So, how I'm defining static stretching is when you hold a muscle in a stretch position without movement for a period of time, usually or close to around 30 seconds. It's traditionally been used to increase flexibility and calm the nervous system, but recent studies suggest it might reduce power output and used immediately before explosive movements. The next, I will be defining dynamic stretching, on the other hand, as this involves active movement based on based stretching. These movements are typically done in a way that mimics the sport or activity that the athlete is about to compete or do. Dynamic stretching is typically designed to increase body temperature, also like warm up the body and activate the muscles. So this project looks at sprint performance, and this will be measured in three ways: the time to complete the 40-yard dash, quadricep muscle activation measured by an EMG, and also how ready the athlete feels based on a subjective 1 to 10 rating. So the first article that I looked at was a systematic review and meta-analysis by Esteban Garcia and some of his colleagues. They examined the impact of both static and dynamic stretching across multiple studies. Their key findings showed that dynamic stretching significantly improved jump height and range of motion. The relevance to sprinting is that it leads to explosive strength and range of motion, and they are essential for starting the driving phases of sprinting. The second article was an experimental lab study. It found that dynamic stretching improves neuromuscular activation measured by an EMG, regardless of stretch speed. There are no performance gains seen after static stretching, and dynamic stretching enhances motor unit recruitment and fast twitch fibers. So the relevance to sprinting would be that sprint start requires rapid neuromuscular response, and dynamic stretching directly supports this. The third article I looked at was a controlled trial by BMC Sports Science and Rehabilitation. Their key findings were that fast dynamic stretching led to the best improvements in performance and range of motion, as well as joint position. Static stretching led to temporary reductions in performance. Balance and were also improved with dynamic methods. And then the relevance to sprinting was that it improved joint control and range of motion, benefited both in acceleration and max speed phases. The fourth article I looked at was a mini review by Frontiers in Sports and Active Living. Their key findings were that strength speed qualities improved most with dynamic warm-ups. Static stretching had inconsistent or negative effects, especially before sprinting. And it recommends combining dynamic movements with sprint drills. So the relevance to sprinting shows dynamic warm-ups transfer better to real sprinting conditions. And the fifth article that I looked at was an experimental study by Frontiers in Physiology. The key findings were that dynamic stretching enhances balance, neuromuscular readiness, and coordination. Static stretching reduced coordination and balance immediately after use, and the effects of stretching lasted up to 15 to 20 minutes post-stretch. The relevance to sprinting is that coordination and balance are key in sprint starts, and dynamic stretching was found to be more beneficial. So, critiques of these studies. While all 5 studies supported dynamic stretching, it's important to acknowledge some of their limitations. Most of the research involved short-term outcomes, and pretty much all of them used young, healthy adults or young athletes, which limits how we can generalize the results. Also, there was a lot of variations in how stretching was defined and applied. Some studies used stretches for 10 seconds, while others lasted up to 60 seconds. There's kind of a lack in the standardization, which makes the comparisons a little bit tricky. On the other side, some evidence suggests that short static stretching, under 30 seconds, may not hurt performance and could help athletes with tightness or injury risk. So while dynamic stretching seems to be best for most athletes, individuality still matters a lot when it comes to stuff like this. So the proposed experimental design for this experiment is a simple crossover experiment with 30 high school athletes, and I included both male and female athletes between the ages of 15 and 18, so all high school athletes. And they are all currently active in sports like track, soccer, basketball, football. Each athlete is to complete both static and dynamic stretching protocols on separate days with a 48-hour window or washout period between the sessions in order to avoid carryover effects. The stretching condition or the stretching conditions were randomized, so it's all random. The protocols that go through this, so before both trials, athletes perform the same 5-minute light jog, mobility warm-up, and then they either did static stretching, so I had them do 5 lower body stretches and held them for 30 seconds each, or they did dynamic stretching, which included 5 movement-based drills like high knees or A-skips, and they also did that for 30 seconds. After stretching, we measured 3 outcomes. We were looking at their sprint performance using the 40-yard dash, quadricep muscle activation using EMG sensors, and their readiness scale, which is from 1 to 10. So my hypothesis for this study is that dynamic stretching would lead to faster sprint times, higher muscle activation, and greater perceived readiness when compared to static stretching. And the results for this study. On average, athletes ran the 40-yard dash in 5.3 seconds after static stretching, and they ran it in 5.1 seconds after dynamic stretching. As you can see here in this graph, when they completed dynamic stretching, their times were significantly reduced. There's a difference of 0.2 of a second, which might seem small, but when in sprinting, it's quite a large gap. And then with the muscle activation, the average EMG readiness or reading for their quadriceps was 45 units after static stretching and 55 units after dynamic stretching. There's a significant increase showing that dynamic movement actually primes the muscles for explosive effort, while static stretching might reduce readiness or keep it similar to before they even did the exercise. And as you can see, the dynamic numbers are much higher. And for the readiness score, on average, their readiness score was 6 after static stretching and an 8 after dynamic stretching. So not only did they perform better, but they also felt more confident and prepared to do the sprints after dynamic warm-ups. Some of the practical applications for this. So what does this mean for all our athletes, coaches, and maybe even PE teachers? It means that dynamic stretching should be the go-to strategy before sprinting or explosive movements. It improves time, muscle readiness, and how athletes feel before completing an exercise. Static stretching still has its values, especially for flexibility and recovery, but it's better safer after workouts or post-workout, not before races or games. In conclusion, the evidence from existing studies and my own experimental data clearly shows that dynamic stretching enhances sprint performance more effectively than static stretching. It prepares the body both physically and mentally, and it mimics the types of movements athletes are about to perform. If we want to maximize performance and reduce injury, we should continue to move away from outdated static warm-ups and towards more dynamic, sports-specific routines. Thank you.